Welcome to Conversations. This is your host, Michael Stone, and I am thrilled to have two goddesses with me today to talk about goddesses. My partner, Meriel, is here today, and she's going to tell you about our guest.
Today, we're so excited to have Hallie Iglehart Austen with us. Welcome. We're going to talk about the wonderful book, The Heart of the Goddess, Art, Myth, and the Meditations of the World's Sacred Feminine. Hallie began studying ancient Greek language and mythology at the age of 12. She graduated from Brown University, drove from England to Nepal, describing her journey in the book Woman's Spirit, and has been leading workshops and rituals on the sacred feminine since 1974. Driven by her love of marine life, Hallie co-founded Sea Flow, Protect Our Living Oceans, and initiated All One Ocean, cleaning up the oceans one beach at a time. Hallie lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and offers classes and consultations on dream work, life transition rituals, and wisdom healing qigong. We're here together today to discuss her beautiful book. And if you would like to follow along by looking at some of the images are just fantastic. Her website is heartgoddess.net, and you can listen and flip through the images at the same time.
Well, welcome, Hallie, and welcome, Meriel. It's really exciting. We've been looking forward to this. And let's just start out talking about this book was originally put out like almost 30 years ago. What was the impetus and the calling that you decided to revise it and put it out at this time?
Well, really, I have to give deep bows to my friend Mayumi Oda, whose artwork appears in the book as well. And every time that I would visit her over the last decade or so in Hawaii, she would say, you really should get this book republished. The world really needs it. And she was also instrumental in creating the Japanese edition of the book. She made that happen in 2001. And so I said, okay, Mayumi, I tried about, 7 or 8 years ago with no success. I just wrote letters myself. And she said, well, Arnie Kotler, who did Parallax Press and Thich Nhat Hanh's books, he's working as an agent now. Maybe he could help you. So boom, it was meant to happen at this time. And then, of course, at the same time that Monkfish agreed to co-publish it with me, then the whole Me Too movement happened, the women's marches, and it's just, obviously it's supposed to be back out at this time. And I'm really happy to see this interweaving of the goddess values and traditions coming up at this time when we need it so badly.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. What does the goddess represent to you, and how do you feel it is relevant to our challenging times?
Well, the goddess to me, it's funny because I have this book called The Heart of the Goddess, Art, Myth, and Meditations of the World's Sacred Feminine. But really, to me, the word goddess and feminine are just stepping stones to getting beyond needing to use those words. Mm. And I say that because I think, well, jokingly, maybe we would just talk about the goddess and the feminine for a few hundred years, and then we'd come back into balance, because we've gotten so out of touch with the goddesses, with honoring women, and we've gotten so out of touch with the values that we put onto goddesses and women. So the way to bring those back, I think, is to start looking at these images, because the images have a message that we can't get even by reading about them or just even looking at them. I ask people to take the pose of the goddess and get a message through that pose. I call it somatic research. It's really like if something comes through that, in addition to what comes through, and you look at the images, or you meditate on them, or you read about them, because I really did do a lot of extensive research into these images starting from 30,000 BCE to the present. And I really think it's the foundation of how we're going to heal the world right now, because if you start empowering women and girls, everybody comes back more into balance. Men are more free to be just humans instead of having to be this extreme hyper masculine, just as women are free to not be this extreme hyper feminine. And we become more what the Taoists call true humans, the capital T, capital H.
Mm.
So as we do that, and there are some of us who've been on this path for decades, like you all, and I'm sure your listeners, then we start realizing that we really are all one, of course, and there isn't this big split between the masculine and the feminine and women and men. We're all humans, we're all part of this world, and the world is part of us. So there's many things I could say about that, but I'll just say briefly, for instance, there are studies that show that when women are empowered, they're equal partners in a society, there's less violence, less poverty, less war. And also more recently, Paul Hawken and his team with Drawdown showed that the number one way to reverse global warming, not just stop it, but reverse it, is if you combine empowering women to have control over their bodies, reproductive freedom, and if you educate girls. The two of those are the number one path to reversing climate change. So these are the facts, these are the studies, et cetera, and so forth. You know, a lot of us know in our gut that we need to bring ourselves back into balance, and we need to reclaim all those attributes that we put onto the feminine and onto the goddess, if we even think about a goddess. I want people to start thinking about goddesses more now, because it's really a question of what do we hold sacred? What images do we surround ourselves with? What stories do we tell ourselves? What stories do we tell our children?
Mm. I love Paul's work. He does really deep research, so he doesn't put something like that out just randomly. It's really powerful to hear that those are the two top ways to deal with climate change. And you were talking about the somatic practice this morning, and Meriel and I were practicing that. And I want to show you my bird woman. What do you think?
Great, great, fantastic. That's wonderful.
I don't know what page that's on, but if you want to look.
Great.
The book that I just absolutely love. It really drew me in. Is the shamanic nature of the book, where you really bring all of people's senses in. It's the visual, it's the there's suggestions in the book to take the poses and experience the energy of the image in a very Qigong-like way. I know you're a Qigong instructor. So that, and all of the suggestions that you offer in the book of really how to embody the energy of these different goddesses is brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. I really want to draw in all the possible ways. I mean, that's how I live and how it works for me. But whatever works for people, and certainly getting into our bodies is a big step towards healing and towards being able to heal the planet. So just that is a lot in itself. And I do many daily practices, but one of them is, what goddess do I feel like I want to invoke for today? And I feel I am her. And that's always a reflection to me as to, where I'm at or what's going on. So it's really great. It's really important to be able to just surround ourselves. Like Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist Vietnamese teacher, says, he talks about the Buddhist precept of right consumption. And he, as you may know, he expands it beyond just drugs and alcohol to what media do you consume? What images do you surround yourself with? What magazines do you read? What books do you read? And so for us, exposing ourselves to programs like yours or reading books like The Heart of the Goddess are ways to feed our psyches with nourishment.
Yeah, and what thoughts are you having?
Yeah.
Another huge area of that. One of the things I was thinking of, Hallie, is my work has always been about healing separation, which is very much for me what this book is about. And there's so much divisiveness, so much separation and anger, and it almost seems like, how could we ever, with 7.5 billion people, ever come together? And I'm thinking of, well, what's the possibility of this book for people dissolving the myth of separation and deepening their connection, men and women, women and women, and with the earth, of course, fundamentally?
Yeah, that's a really great and huge question. And I think of it on the personal level, but I also think of it on the planetary level. And back to the question of empowering women and girls. I mean, I've talked with a few people who had this book as teenagers or as children in the first edition. And I think, oh my gosh, how different their lives were to be growing up with these positive myths of female images rather than the more negative ones that I grew up with, or the more victim ones that I grew up with. And I think that the book has tremendous potential for empowering women and girls, and that once we do that, then that is a major step towards healing the world. As I said, that's more on the planetary level. On the personal level, there's about healing the divisions between women and men, between the parts of ourselves that feel like, oh, I want to be out in the world, but I really want to be, in more reflective, like that it's not this either or. And many of us are trying to nurture those reflective parts of ourselves because they're not honored in the culture. So it's about healing our relationships, but it's also about healing ourselves and being able to hold all the different parts, the yin and the yang, if you will, and know that they're part of one whole. I also, on a larger scale, I do want to say that once you empower women and girls to have choice around reproductive freedom, once this starts happening in society, the birth rate becomes more manageable. Where I think a lot of the problems, and sadly, that we're having in the world today are because women have not been able to control, be able to space their children in healthy ways, or choose not to have children. They haven't even thought that they had that power. So they're just, as some people say, they're just too many people on the earth. And so people are feeling that pressure and getting more tribal and more nationalistic and wanting to keep other people out. So of course, we need to figure out ways to share our resources. That's super important. And that's part of the goddess path. The goddess loves all her children equally. But also part of the path is bringing the balance of humans, the number of humans on the planet, into a manageable form. Obviously, we're consuming way too many resources. So that's pretty material and deep and an intense thing to look at. And it's not going to be resolved overnight on a large scale, but we can each be healing ourselves and reaching out and acting and electing people that are acting more from these values. The same values that enabled many of the goddess cultures like Minoan Crete or Catalhoyuk or the Cycladic culture to live in peace for 1,000 years, even though they were very sophisticated cultures. I mean, think what it would be like to live in peace for 50 years. And where would our resources go? And what would our nervous systems feel like? I mean, I know my dear late father, he was on the front lines in Germany in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II at 19. And he had to live with that the rest of his life. And, we grew up with that. And then his father before him and so forth and so on. So there's just so many, humans have so many more options for ways of living than we realize until we look back into when we had more partnership cultures, or we look at contemporary partnership cultures and realize that this dominator, what I call hyper-masculinized culture we live in is not the only option. And that's what's so great about your show and what you're offering. And I bow to you and thank you for that.
Thank you.
We have lots of choices. We just have to wake up and realize how many choices we have. And it takes all of us together, obviously. And how I think of it is that it's like the web of life has become frayed, and there are many of us working from different places to reweave this web of life, and we're coming from the different angles and different perspectives, and how I envision it is at some point we're going to meet in the middle and turn around and go, oh my gosh, it's all rewoven. How wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are, like you were mentioning, we are so practiced in imaging trauma and past and future trauma. Look at all the movies that are out there that are created on annihilism of our earth, and reprogramming by having these positive images and embodying the energy of that. Now you've got, as a suggestion for readers of the book, a week-long goddess work program. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so we begin with looking at the images of whatever goddess one feels particularly drawn to. Like Michael might want to put the bird-headed snake goddess up and just have her out for a week. And then on day 2, throughout the day, he would be taking this pose of the bird-headed snake goddess and feeling, what does that feel like? Most people find that's a very clearing, grounding kind of experience. And then on day 3, you could set up an altar to her and just continue with that, and then, you know, speak as her. So it's really, I mean, I love making altars. They're so creative, aren't they? And so any opportunity to make an altar is a really wonderful one. And these different goddesses evoke different parts of ourselves. So this is just a way of making the goddess more part of our everyday life. Like, you know, in Bali, where the grandmothers are going around making offerings in the family compound 4 times a day. What if we did that? What if we made offerings? I mean, maybe you do. But what if we made offerings 4 times a day, or like Muslims do, you know, meditate or pray 4 times a day? And eventually we can weave this throughout our whole day and make our lives truly sacred the way they really are. Even if it's just for a minute, stopping at work, at your desk or whatever, just stopping and remembering the cosmos, remembering how big it all is and how miraculous it all is, and then remembering the cosmos inside of us, the digestive systems and the eyes and all these miracles that are going on inside of us all the time.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about, you know, because we practice shamanism, is that when you're working with a power animal or spirit guide, one of the key things is to ask, you know, what are the gifts that you're giving me? What are the strengths and talents that I can learn from you? And I was thinking, as I was looking through your book and all these beautiful goddess, you know, statues and figures, and
I'm just gonna put this one up.
Oh,
yes. I recommend trying taking this pose right now. Grounded. Inside your belly.
That was my favorite.
That's so great.
Each of those goddess figures, it's almost like it has an archetypical gift to give that if you're not looking for it or listening for it, you might miss.
Yes, so we need to pay attention. Is that what you're saying? I think.
Yeah, of course.
To pay attention and to pause and go within and listen to the messages. I mean, it's quite amazing to be able to receive this message from thousands of years ago. I mean, when you take the pose and it feels so real and so dramatic, you know, these human beings created, or however you want to think of it, however it came to us, we're still like those people. And you mentioned, Meriel, the shamanic aspect of the book. I mean, absolutely. And most of these cultures are what we would call shamanic. They were, or they still are. And it's funny because I just saw a note about something that said why we need shamanism more than ever. And what people have been saying to me since the book just came back out again, we need the goddess more than ever now. So I don't think the two are separate.
No, not at all.
And amazing that the time weaving, but also the cultures, that these goddesses' images that you've collected are from every continent on our planet.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that was really important to me. I didn't want to do another book of just European goddesses, which I grew up with, and maybe with a few Asian thrown in. I really wanted it to be multicultural, and that back in the 80s when I was doing the research, that was challenging, still challenging, but there were a lot of gifts and a lot of synchronicities that brought these images to me. And what I say is that I heard the woman who is the chief architect of the Paris climate talks say, if you don't allow women to work to their full capacity, you're losing out on 50% of your human resources. And I would say that is true. And then also, if we're not honoring all the cultures of the world, we're missing out on their wisdom. Yeah. And this wisdom is so needed now. And slowly but surely, as more and more of us bring that wisdom forward, whether in our personal lives or in our work, we begin to become, as I said, true humans again, and bring balance and live more in harmony with the earth. I really know this is possible, and I know it's going to happen one way or another. Let's just try to make it be as pleasant a process as possible.
And perhaps now more than ever, that wisdom is accessible because of our technologies and connections that we.
That's true. And I also encourage people to look into the cultures of their own lineage as well, because all of us have ancestors who honored the goddess as well as the god. And if you reach really far back, it seems like it was mainly the goddess. If you go back to Paleolithic and Neolithic times, because most of the images we find are female images. And there was one recently found that is way older than anything in the book. The oldest one in the book is 30,000 years old. But there's one recently found in Israel, a goddess image that is dated to be between 233,000 and 800,000 years old.
Wow.
I know. So this is just, it completely reworks everything that we think about human existence and about the origins of human culture.
Mm. You know, one of the things you mentioned a minute ago was how hard it was for you to find a cross-cultural, cross-temporal art objects and goddess statues. And the other thing too is about the information. When we talk about, 30 or 200,000 years ago, we have a deficit because of revisionist history of being able to actually find, well, what was really happening? Now, I imagine you've done a lot of research in this area. I'm really curious about these matrilineal times before the patriarch, and also wondering what the impact, I think you mentioned something in the book about this, the impact that agriculture had in that, and how that, the impact it had on shifting to a patriarchal dominator society.
Yeah, it seems like that may have been an important contributing factor. So it's like it's nobody's fault, but it's just what happened. I also do want to, well, there was something you said, what was the question you said in the beginning that was?
Well, the revisionist history and how hard it is to look back and actually get information about what was this? We find these objects, well, they weren't just some kind of sex symbols, although they were sexual and sensual in a great way, but we don't have the stories because history's been rewritten.
Exactly, yes, you're totally right.
And of course, the dominator writes the history, the winner of the, so it's a problem.
Yeah, and this is really true. I learned this in college, my first year. I spent a whole first half of the year studying Old Testament in the course, and the next part of the year studying the New Testament. And what I learned from that is that these things get rewritten to, suit whoever. So that's why I think the images are so important, because you can destroy them, but you can't change them. They are what they are. And so if we're looking at images from different cultures or different times, that's coming to us directly and speaking to us directly. So that's that's that power. And I did dredge back into like some books on African art to find, some scholars in African art or African history who would say, well, we can see in this word, sometimes it's just the meaning of words. We can see that women were honored because the word for throne is the same as the same as the word for queen is the same as the word for woman, for womb, so they're just all these little trails that you follow. And I respect these scholars who devoted their lives to these different cultures. And I did have them vetted by a woman at the African Art Museum in Washington, the Smithsonian, and so forth, because I know I can read or see some of this, and I might have my own cultural overlay that might not see it quite correctly. So any mistakes that are in the book are mine, but I did try to have it all checked out as much as possible, because I really felt a responsibility to the cultures for that. And I felt a responsibility to present them as well. So in terms of agriculture, as my friend Charlene Spretnak said, who's written a number of books, said, well, it seemed, somebody else who said this, Adele Getty said, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And, they think that women probably developed agriculture because women were the gatherers mostly, and men were the hunters, so they would have noticed as the seeds fell and they sprouted. But it does seem that as agriculture developed starting 10,000 years ago and then culminating 5,000 years ago, that created a surplus. And so then that started creating a hierarchy and
an economic system.
And an economic system. I mean, I read a fascinating article in the New Yorker, of all places, a couple of years ago, or a year ago, actually, about gather-hunter cultures. And it was saying, maybe they really are better off than we are, is what this article in the New Yorker, of all places, was saying. And it was one of those long New Yorker articles, and it went into talking about taxes, right? When there was a surplus, and you start having taxes, and then you start having this whole elaborate system.
Inequality. It brings inequality. Yeah.
And what's interesting is because some people will say, well, yeah, but if we didn't have our agriculture, we wouldn't have security, and you'd just be, dependent on the, vagaries of nature if you're doing hunter-gathering. Oh, and by the way, it's pretty well determined that in I call them gathering hunting cultures, because 80% of the food is provided by the gatherers, and the 20% of the food, which is really important, the meat, but it's 20%. So it's just really important for people to realize, because we grew up with this caveman image. Literally the image, I don't know if you all have this image, but I have the image, the caveman is dragging the woman into the cave by her hair. This is an image I grew up with. And that's really not how it was. The women were honored in the Paleolithic and Neolithic times. And also even the handprints that are on some of the Paleolithic caves, they fit the hands of the women and the children. So it's probably the women and the children making this cave art. So I only say this to kind of turn upside down what we grew up thinking. And I was blessed to spend a whole season on Saturday mornings back in the 70s studying Paleolithic and Neolithic art with Sandra Roos, who taught at the California College of Arts and Crafts, who amassed thousands of slides of Paleolithic and Neolithic art from Europe. So I really got to delve back into my European ancestors' heritage. So here we are. But I also do want to say that this idea that if we didn't have agriculture, we wouldn't be secure is questionable, because I just was at Bioneers a month ago, whatever, or 2 months ago, and love Bioneers. And they really increased even more the Indigenous Forum, where I spent most of the 3 days. And Ilarion Mercurioff, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who is a shaman from the Aleutian Islands,
Been on our show.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I love Ilarion. Yeah.
One of the things that he said is our people didn't store food. Now we're talking about Inuit people, Arctic Circle, where there's plenty of refrigeration. And anyway, and it's all, it's mostly hunting there. He said, we didn't store food. We trusted that nature would provide for us.
Yep.
So that's a whole different mindset. The gathering, hunting mindset is on many levels, I can't get into all of them, is a whole different mindset of kind of like the gift economy that nature gives to us. We give thanks, we give back to nature. And I think that we can, even though we can't, most of us can't become gatherer hunters, and we can start foraging for food in our yards. You know, the weeds, some of them are very nutritious, really, seriously. I've just been reading a book called The Jungle Effect, and she's saying it's about, she's a doctor in San Francisco, and she heals people by looking at their true indigenous diet. And one of those is gathering the weeds from your yard and sauteing them, and garlic and lemon and so forth. So nature, as we know, is very abundant and generous. And I think
so,
we practice that.
We're so cut off from nature. We're so distracted. You know, I went to a place in Vancouver the other day recently, and everyone's walking with their cell phone, looking at it, or sitting on the bench doing their cell phone, and the news and the busyness and the hurry and the bustle. People are completely, you know, living in hermetically sealed buildings. We've lost. Meriel and I just went on an 11-day vision quest. It was, you know, it was quite amazing to be out there, you know, without food or water. Or, well, we had water in the river, but we were in the Gila wilderness. And two people who are actually quite outdoorsy. We live on the ocean. We're in nature, but being out there like that really deepened that sense of how connected we are to the elements and the earth, and most people don't take the time to do that.
Yeah, that's part of the hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And breaking that spell of the hypnosis and coming back to what I call the real world, and the world that nourishes us rather than making us anxious and feel like we should be doing more, or that it's endless. What we can be doing. And of course, the children, you know, the nature deficit disorder that's epidemic amongst children now. So there are many ways to address the healing of our planet. And I'm grateful that there are many people doing it and continuing to be more.
I had an image of dandelions. You're mentioning the greens in the garden, and the dandelions that, instead of us welcoming them into our diet and realizing how nutritious they are and how medicinal they are, we're spraying Roundup on them. You know, some people, not everybody, but you know, it's still happening. It's still happening.
Yes, and then we're poisoning
the bounty and the connections that are just right in front of us in our yards.
Yeah, there's a lot. And it can be so simple. I mean, it can be just taking a little bit of time every day or throughout the day to do a meditation practice, or to be in nature, or combine the two, sitting in nature with your back up against a tree or by the ocean. Huh, fantastic.
I just had this image of having your book and the goddess images in kindergarten and first grade, you know, and then I realized, oh, no, it would be banned for sexuality in it, you know?
Yeah, it could be. I had to have a friend of mine, Beatrice Bowles, who's a storyteller, who was just working with another storyteller, and she was good. They were going to be working with some 6th grade girls, and she said she was going to take the book and show it to the girls. So we'll find out what the image is. But that, I mean, that's such the band part is so interesting. We're not supposed to know what our bodies look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and that's what I started with in the early 70s, was teaching women self-help and volunteering at Planned Parenthood, but teaching women to really become familiar with their bodies and take charge of their bodies. Because if you're not familiar with them, you can't take control of them.
Why do you feel that the sensuality of these images are so important?
Oh my gosh, why is sensuality so important? Because we live in these bodies, and like you were saying, you know, that's part of the shamanic aspect of the book, is engaging all the senses. So really, yes, we have, boy, this culture is simultaneously and ironically so terrified of sensuality. Well, I know why, because if people are sensuous, then we're not going to work so hard, and then we're not going to be part of the whole Protestant ethic capitalist machine. I mean, and I'm not the person who made that connection. There's trying to remember his name, an amazing, Max Weber, sociologist from over 100 years ago, wrote a book called The Rise of Capitalism and the Protestant Ethic, and how they came up at the same time and they fed one another. Because Protestantism said the only way you can be saved from hell is by your works, and capitalism needed workers. So I see it as a massive kind of disempowerment of people and splitting them off from community and isolating them, us, and that we really need to reclaim. And part of the way of doing that is learning to enjoy life, enjoy our senses, and celebrating them. And it's no mistake that a whole large group of these goddesses are celebrating the sensuality or the erotic. And the erotic isn't necessarily just sexual, it's like the erotic nature of life. You know, building a bookshelf can be erotic. You're engaging all your senses, or you're, out walking. Can be erotic. That's a definition I think the poet Audre Lorde brought in about the true nature of the erotic. It's love of life.
Yeah, yeah. One of the connections I was thinking about is your connection with the ocean. I'm someone who every day gets up, I have a shower outside, I go outside, I honor the elements, and I live on the ocean. So I'm very connected to the ocean. And of course, the ocean is, for me, the feminine aspect of the elements, the intuition going inside, the water, that whole area. I'm just wondering what you see as that connection for yourself, because you've put a lot of work into working on ocean care.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's compassion. It's caring for the creatures of the ocean. And that's, you could say that's a maternal kind of thing or a feminine kind of thing. And certainly the ocean is related to the moon throughout the world because of the tides, and the moon's related to women because of the menstrual cycle. Yet I know many wonderful men who are also working for the oceans, to protect the oceans. But to me, it really is about being just horrified in the first part of this century about what the destruction of marine life by Navy sonars and shipping noise, and then the really totally unnecessary destruction of marine life through our consumer society, i.e. the plastics in our ocean. And it's just like, it's something I can't turn away from. And it's neither of these topics are fun to look at. They're not. They're very painful, but totally necessary, I think, for us to look at reality. And so sometimes I would say, well, wait a minute, how did I get from the goddess to trash, dealing with the plastic trash in the ocean? And then I realized it's just a different way of serving the mother. So that's how I don't think about the mother a lot, but that is kind of just a concept, how I orient my values and my life. It's just a different way of serving her, which is serving the world. And it's also, everything is so connected. In terms of our throwaway society, it's really about helping people, and this is how it's also connected, feel value inside of themselves and filling up that spiritual void so they don't feel like they have to go out and consume and buy and throw away, which we were also programmed to do by 1950s advertising. There was a marketing person in the 50s who said, we have to make a religion out of consuming and rituals out of using things and throwing them away. We need things used up, thrown away faster and faster in order to stimulate the economy. So why do we feel the need for any addiction, whether it's consuming, thrown away, or whatever? It's because there's a spiritual void. So it's all related. All the plastics in the ocean are related to our endless consumerism and our lack of mindfulness. And how we can turn that around is just to start being mindful and treasuring what we have. So we don't need to buy more, or we don't want to throw it away. I mean, I know you know all of this, but to me, it's so, the quote, spirituality is so inseparable from the activism.
Yes.
It's just what has to happen for me right now, and I think has to happen for all of us to survive in a planet that we like. I mean, did an interview with a man on a late night talk show in Minneapolis, and he was just saying, I don't want my child to go swimming in this river that's got trash floating in it, however it is that it connects to people, whatever they love, whatever inspires them. This is really important. And then the other side is bringing beauty into the world and offering and creating, co-creating, as we're all doing, this world that we want to live in and that we can project into the future. That's really important. Beauty is really important to me.
Yeah.
And this is such a beautiful book. It really is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So we're getting close to the end of the time. I want to again tell people your website and how to get a hold of you. Do you have any particular programs in the Bay Area or Sacramento, most of the area we cover, but also we're on the podcast, so we're all over the world.
Thank you. I'm taking a break now until mid-February, when then I'll be doing the book reading in Sebastopol, and then I'll be doing another workshop up there, and there'll be others coming. But my calendar will be on the website, heartgoddess.net. And I'm also I do teach Qigong at my house here in town, Mill Valley, just north of San Francisco. And that's been by word of mouth since I stopped doing it publicly to do All One Ocean. But now I'm going to start teaching more because I love Qigong so much.
We love Qigong too.
Such a difference. It's such an amazingly powerful healing practice. And I also am open to doing sessions with people around life's rites of passage and a particular form of dream work that I really love, the Sonoy dream work, which is about completing dreams in a harmonious way. It's not about analyzing dreams, but about completing them. So I'm open to doing private sessions on those. As I'm pulled, not doing the ocean work so much anymore and back into doing the Heart of the Goddess work, which I love dearly. And I love having talked with you and your listeners. It's just so heartening to see the future being made present right now.
One of the things I wanted to talk, did you want to say the website again?
It's heartgoddess.net.
Heartgoddess.net.
Yeah.
Was for the men out there, because men are confused right now. They're scared in organizations, particularly. They're scared of saying the wrong thing. They're withholding a lot of their feelings, which is just the opposite of what perhaps needs to happen. But there's a lot of fear, and I think that with the divine feminine and the Me Too movements and all the empowerment of women, there's a real potential to create more alienation. And I think that your work, if men can take that in more, they can find that inner feminine in themselves. But I'm wondering your thoughts around that for the men who listen to this show.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I was really inspired to hear the words of Reverend Ladale Benson, who's from North Carolina, and he said, we must expose the myth or the lie that patriarchy works for men. He's saying it doesn't work for men. And there are some wonderful men working to help other men improve their relationships with women or deal with issues inside themselves that might make them abusive towards women. But there's really, I totally agree with you. I think of what's going on now, kind of like as women's empowerment and men's liberation. Of course, you can say it's both, but I think at this point, women's liberation has been going on. There's been men's liberation going on a little bit, but it's been pretty small, scale over the decades. I really feel for men because they're packed into such a narrow little package of how they're supposed to behave to be a man in this culture, in this hyper masculine culture. I mean, it's okay for girls to be tomboys, but it's not okay for boys to be sissies. Just one example. We're all supposed to be more into the masculine mode. So it's essential for men to be finding out what it means to be truly human. Yeah. And I think rites of passage are a really important part of that. I think having rites of passage for boys and girls at adolescence is really essential. I think our not having those is part of our problem, and I'd really like to see those brought in as meaningful rites of passage with some depth and some spirit and some commitment to the larger whole. So, and it's never too late to have a rite of passage. It's never too late to become an adult. So I think some of what we were doing in the 70s in the women's movement was, creating meaningful adolescent rites of passage. And I think some men have been doing that and can do it now and help us create this new world that is more balanced, that is not so restrictive and disempowering, because men are just as disempowered in some ways as women are, and even more so, I think emotionally. And I know we're getting to the end, but I was saying to somebody, when I was quoting Reverend Liddell Benson's quote about, patriarchy doesn't work for men, and I was saying, yeah, look at the Kavanaugh Ford hearings. Do those men look happy? Does Brett Kavanaugh look happy? Does Mitch McConnell look happy? Mm-hmm. Does, who in the White House look happy? They may be like triumphant because they won something, but do they look happy? Do they look fulfilled? I don't think so. And so I think we are on the cusp of being able to reclaim true happiness for both women and men. And it takes compassion, and it takes work, and it takes honesty, and it's totally possible.
Mm. The other piece that you brought into that was the myth creation, and that the importance of creating contemporary myth.
Yes. Yes.
We have myths from the past, and how can we learn from that and yet be creating for present time?
Right. What myths, what stories do we want to be telling ourselves and our children? So it's looking at the old myths that maybe really do work, like the story of the descent of Inanna, where she loses all of her powers and then she is reborn and regains her powers with letting go and then being reborn. But what myths do we want to create for ourselves? What stories do we want to tell ourselves, and seeing our lives as myths, as sagas worth telling and remembering? I mean, that's a really great practice.
We really need to learn to open to and listen to those places of opposition. I was thinking of someone that is a friend from high school, and they're Trump supporters, and they're the nicest people in the world, they're just sweetest people. But they watch Fox News, and I was telling them a little bit about my climate change work, and the woman was interested, so she ordered a book to learn something, bless her heart. And she ordered a book on climate change, but it was from the Cato Institution, one of the most far right wing, supported by, large money, those two brothers.
Yeah.
But also in the gender thing, I had an opportunity to study for 2 years with Will Keepin and Cynthia Bricks. You probably know the gender reconciliation work that they do. And I was, someone who had a lot of trauma as a child, but to listen to the men and have the women on the outside of the circle, and then to listen to the women with the men on the outside of the circle, and really hear the stories was an incredibly transformative experience. And I think that the work you're doing, Hallie, is really powerful in that way, that this is a book that people could work with and, like you said, take on these things, but also use it to open up to other people and other ideas. And you know, I love being I love being the snake bird woman.
Well, it is a qigong pose too, so that's, you know, it's really great. I love it. That's wonderful. Heaven and earth united in you. It's beautiful.
Well, it's been such a delight to talk with you, Hallie Iglehart Austen. I want to say that right. And again, your website, heartgoddess.net. If people want to look at the video of this, we'll have it up on our Patreon site.
Patreon.com/conversations.
Conversations, and all of our shows and new moon calls and some webinars are up on that too, so that you're welcome to check into that. Really deep gratitude for the work you're doing, Hallie, and thank you for putting this beautiful book out, because I missed it 30 years ago, but I'm sure glad I got to see it this time around.
I'm glad to, and thank you, Michael. Thank you, Meriel. Blessings on you.
Thank you.
And the entire world and all your listeners.
Yes, many blessings.
Thank you so much.